The document arrived at 300 station. Time formatted as a courtesy notice. Not a law, not a directive, a courtesy. I read it 3 times, not because I didn't understand it, because I wanted to make sure I understood exactly what they thought of us when they wrote it. This way, the Galactic Compact's Clause 7 Sigma passed by the eighth majority in a closed session without a floor debate, without a single vote from Earth's observer seat, was now official policy across every charted lane in known space. Human faster-than-light military vessels were permanently banned from all galactic corridors. Permanently. I set the document down on my desk in the Earth Diplomatic Annex on Station Veral 4 and looked out the viewport at the slow rotation of the docking ring. Below, 14 colony worlds, 3 mining stations out past the reach, 2 billion, 100 million humans living beyond Earth's own gravity well, all of them now sitting in space with no fleet between them and anything that wanted to come close. The Compact's peacekeeping force, the Veil, had an average emergency response time to human flag distress calls of 11 days. 11 days is a very specific number to know by heart. I know it the way I know my own name. I know it because of Karis Station. I don't talk about Karis Station. My comm unit buzzed. Admiral Hal Straka calling from Earth Command. I let it buzz 4 times before I answered. He was already talking before the channel fully opened, voice tight, running too vast. Yara, tell me you've seen the document. I've seen it. Then you understand we need to mobilize. We can't sit here and let them. Hal, I said it the way you say a word to stop a door from swinging shut. He stopped. Sit down. I'm already sitting. Then sit differently. I need you calm. There was a pause. I could hear him breathing, the particular rhythm of a man swallowing a response he knows is wrong. Hal Straka had commanded 3 battle groups and survived 2 interstellar engagements. He was not a man who sat still when someone drew a line in front of him. But he trusted me. I still didn't fully understand why. What are you going to do? He asked. I'm going to read, I said. Another pause, longer this time. That's it. Hal, they've had 600 years to build this legal system. Every clause, every provision, every amendment is stacked on top of something older. They think we haven't read any of it. I picked up the courtesy notice again and turned it over in my hand. They're right that we haven't. I'm going to fix that. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then you want me to hold the fleet back on the strength of a reading list. I want you to hold the fleet back because if you move it, you hand them exactly what they need to make this permanent. Right now it's a clause. You move those ships, it becomes a precedent. I set the notice down. Give me time. How much time? I looked at the stars outside my viewport, the slow, indifferent spin of everything out there that didn't care about us at all. 18 months. He laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. 18 months, Yara. The colonies are scared. I know. Tell them to be patient and to document everything. Every veil response time, every unanswered distress signal, every delay. I need that data. And if something happens before 18 months, I didn't answer that because there was no answer that would make him feel better, and I'd stopped offering comfort. That cost accuracy a long time ago. I'll call you in 72 hours, I said, and closed the channel. I sat in the quiet for a while. The Annex had 12 rooms, and I used 3 of them. The rest were stacked with document crates from the compact. Archives physical copies I'd been requesting for 6 months under a provision that gave observer state representatives access to pre-compact foundational materials for diplomatic orientation purposes. Nobody had paid much attention to the requests because nobody paid much attention to Earth's diplomatic representative doing anything other than sitting quietly in the corner of sessions and not causing trouble. That was the thing about being ignored. It had uses. I pulled the first crate onto my desk. It was the original foundational treaty of the Galactic Compact, 612 years old, written in 4 languages, 2 of which required a translation matrix to render in anything a human could read. I'd already acquired the matrix 3 months ago. The clause that banned our fleets was nested in Section 7, part of a security framework the Caith had pushed through 40 years earlier during a period of instability in the outer lanes. It looked solid, it read solid. The language was careful and the precedent citations were long, and the whole thing had the particular weight of something that had been in place so long that challenging it felt like trying to argue with gravity. But gravity had rules too, and rules had origins, and origins sometimes had Grex. I found the first one at 700. It was a single line in an amendment ratification clause from 300 years before the ban was ever written. It said that any security provision affecting the sovereign movement rights of member states required unanimous consent from all spacefaring members at the time of ratification, not a majority vote. Unanimous, every spacefaring member. Earth had not been a spacefaring member 300 years ago. Earth was one now. The ratification of Clause 7 Sigma was, by the Compact's own foundational rules, procedurally void. I sat back in my chair. I looked at the line for a long time, then I looked at the rest of the document around it, tracing connections, checking references, following the chain of citations backward through the centuries, to make sure I was reading what I thought I was reading. I was not just void, every enforcement action taken under it, the patrol seizures, the 3 impounded human vessels out in the reach, the formal warnings issued to colony defense contractors, all of it under the Compact's own foundational treaty, constituted unprovoked interference with a member state's sovereign movement rights. They hadn't just banned our fleets. They'd handed me the argument that demolished the ban. But I didn't celebrate. I didn't call. How? I didn't do anything except pull the next document from the crate, because one line in one amendment meant nothing without 200 more documents supporting it, and I had work to do. I submitted Earth's formal acknowledgement of Clause 7 Sigma that afternoon, signed, dated, formatted correctly in all 6 official compact languages, cooperative, compliant, the model of a small, grateful observer state accepting the decision of the majority without complaint. Attached to it in a secondary filing that slotted neatly into the submission queue was Earth's application to restructure the Compact's legal framework under Provision 44, a provision that hadn't been invoked 6 centuries, the one that allowed a member state to formally challenge the jurisdiction of any clause if they could demonstrate systemic harm to their civilian population. The filing was 47 pages. I'd been Writing it for 3 months. Nobody noticed it in the queue. Why? Would they? Earth filed a lot of paperwork that nobody read. We were the new ones, the small ones, the species that was still supposed to be grateful for a seat at the table, even a non-binding one. I turned off my desk lamp at 200. The crates were still stacked along every wall. The translation matrix was running on 3 documents simultaneously, the soft blue light of it painting the room in pale lines. I had 18 months. They had 600 years of legal architecture. They'd never once expected anyone to actually read. Lord have mercy on their math. I found Suvith on the 3rd floor of the compact central archive on station Veril 4, 14 days after the ban went through. He was a Thelian, which meant he was roughly the shape of a large question mark, his upper body permanently curved forward over whatever he was reading, his pale hands moving across documents with the focused care of someone who genuinely loved paper. Thelians were the compact's archivists. Historically, they cataloged, they organized. They did not typically get involved in politics. He looked up when I walked in and asked if I needed help finding something. Everything from the pre-compact era, I said. Specifically, anything related to the foundational ratification structure of the security provisions and anything on Provision 44. He blinked at me for a moment. Provision 44 has not been referenced in active legal proceedings in 603 years. I know. May I ask why you're interested in it? Diplomatic orientation research, I said. I'm very thorough. He looked at me the way a person looks at someone who has just said something technically true in a way that is clearly not the whole truth. Then he went and pulled the documents. He was quiet about it, efficient, and he didn't ask more questions that day. I liked him immediately. Over the following weeks, I developed what I could only describe as a working relationship with Suvith that existed somewhere between professional collaboration and the kind of strain friendship that forms between 2 people who spend too many hours in the same room with bad lighting and too much coffee. He reorganized my document system every few days. I reorganized it back. We never discussed this. It was our only point of genuine friction. He started asking questions around the 3rd week, not the pointed kind, the genuinely puzzled kind, which was different and somehow more difficult to navigate. You are reading the original language of the security framework, he said one afternoon, not looking up from his own cataloging. The pre-ratification drafts, not just the final text. Yes. Why does the pre-ratification language matter? The final ratified text is what has legal standing. The final text is what the Keth wanted everyone to read. I said the drafts are what they were actually trying to do. There's a difference, and the difference has legal weight if you can trace it through the amendment record. Suvith set down his stylus. He looked at me with an expression I'd come to recognize as his version of alarm, which was subtle enough that I'd missed it the first 4 times I'd seen it. Commander O's, are you building a jurisdictional challenge to Clause 7 Sigma? I didn't look up from my screen. I'm doing diplomatic orientation research. You have requested 947 documents in the past 3 weeks. I'm very thorough. He was quiet for a long time. Then he picked up his stylus and went back to cataloging. I will find you the pre-ratification drafts from the amendment cycles between 250 and 310, he said. They are in a physical storage section. That requires a specific access form. And GT snorts. And GT, I will acquire the form. I looked up then. He was already walking toward the back of the archive. The documents from that period were where everything became structural, not one broken link, but a whole chain of them. The unanimous consent requirement I'd found in the foundational treaty wasn't an isolated anomaly. It was the principle that threaded through the entire ratification architecture of every major security provision the compact had passed in its first 2 centuries. It had been quietly sidelined in the 3rd century when the Keth bloc consolidated its majority, not removed, just buried under newer language that assumed it was no longer operative. But it was still there, and it still applied to any provision affecting movement rights. I mapped it across 11 documents, then 20, then 60. By the time I was done, I didn't just have an argument against Clause 7 Sigma. I had an argument against the legitimacy of 8 other major security provisions, 5 of which had active enforcement actions running against non-majority member states at this very moment. Small species, quiet ones who'd accepted restrictions on their movement, their defense spending, their communication protocols because the compact said so, and the compact was the law, and the compact had always been this way. It hadn't always been this way, that was the point. I printed the core documents in physical form and stacked them on my desk in order of citation chain. The stack was 43 cm tall. I reorganized it twice. Suvith reorganized it once while I was asleep and got the order wrong by 2 documents, which I discovered at 500 and fixed before I'd even fully registered that I was awake. I reorganized his cataloging system in retaliation. He noticed by mid-morning and gave me a look that communicated profound disapproval without a single word. A Keth observer came to my office in the 6th week, senior diplomatic staff, the kind of person the Keth sent when they wanted to deliver a message without being seen to deliver a message. He was courteous in the specific way that very large political entities are courteous to very small ones, smoothly, warmly, in a way that made the size difference feel like a kindness rather than a fact. He asked how I was settling in. He asked about Earth's position on the upcoming resource lane renegotiations. He asked very casually whether I'd found the compact's archive facilities adequate for my research needs. I told him everything was wonderful. I offered him tea. I agreed pleasantly with his summary of the current political landscape. I showed him nothing. After he left, Suvith appeared in the doorway of my office. That was Keth Senior Observer Veldes. He said he is responsible for political compliance monitoring across 17 member state delegations. I know. He came here because someone told him. You have been spending significant time in the archive. I assumed. Suvith looked at the stacks of documents on every surface in my office. Then he looked at me. Commander, whatever you are building, you should know that they Keth have 600 years of experience neutralizing legal challenges from smaller member states. They have standard procedures, delays, procedural objections, jurisdictional disputes. They will bury your filing in process for as long as it takes for Earth to run out of resources, or patience. I know about the delays, I said. You have an answer for them. I filed for continuous standing obligation status at the same time. I filed the Provision 44 challenge. I picked up my tea. It's an old procedural right, requires the compact to actively respond to any challenge involving potential civilian harm within 90 cycles, no delay permitted. Suvith stood very still for a moment. Where did you find that provision? Volume 14 of the Pre-Compact Procedural Codex, third shelf from the bottom left section, the one with the binding damage that nobody had opened since before I was born. I looked at him over my cup. The one you were going to recommend they transferred to offsite storage last month. He processed that. I did not transfer it. I know, that's why I like you, Suvith. He went back to his desk without another word. I heard the particular sound of him pulling another document from a crate, not his assigned cataloging. Something new. He worked 2 hours past his usual finish time that evening. The thing about grief that nobody tells you is that it is also a kind of fuel if you let it be. Letting it be is the hard part. It would have been much easier to have Hal send the fleet much faster. The direct response, the human response, the chest-forward response. My crew on Kareth Station would have understood the fleet response. Some of them would have called for it themselves. But I'd watched what the direct response got us before. I'd watched 11 days pass. I knew what direct looked like when the rules said it wasn't allowed. So I sat in a room full of 600-year-old documents and I read. I read everything. And I took notes that Suvith organized better than I did. The morning I filed the full challenge, I ate the last of the protein bar supply I'd brought from Earth. I had been rationing them for 6 weeks by that point, not because I couldn't get food on Varel 4, but because somewhere around week 3, I'd stopped being able to make decisions about meals, and the bars required no decisions at all. You ate them, they sustained you. And I put the wrapper in the recycling unit and submitted the filing at 609. 1,412 pages, cross-referenced, indexed, annotated, available in all 6 compact official languages, including Velshani, which took a specialized rendering system 38 hours to produce correctly, because Velshani was tonal and written simultaneously on 2 spatial planes, and most translation systems treated it as decorative rather than functional. I had paid out of Earth's diplomatic operational budget for a specialist system to render it properly. The Keth, who comprised roughly 30% of Velshani native speakers in the compact, would have to read every argument in their own second language, rendered flawlessly. Suvith had found the specialist system. I called him into my office after the submission confirmation came through and showed him the receipt. He looked at the cost of the rendering system for a long moment. You spent 14% of Earth's quarterly diplomatic operating budget on a language formatting tool. The compact rules require accessible filings for all official language communities. I said I was following the rules. Commander Osai, he set the receipt down. That is the most aggressive act of procedural compliance I have ever witnessed. Thank you. He made the sound that served Felians as a short laugh, low and slightly startled. I'd only heard it twice before. The compact's initial response came back. In 4 days, a procedural delay request. Standard language, warm tone, deeply condescending in the specific way of something that expected to work. They cited review period requirements and resource allocation constraints and the complexity of the submission scope. The language was careful. The subtext was, "Go away." I had filed the continuous standing obligation attachment simultaneously with the main challenge nestled in the submission package behind the main index, formatted as a standard procedural addendum in font size, consistent with the rest of the document, so it did not stand out. Visually, anyone skimming for the headline filing would have skimmed past it. The compact's procedural team had skimmed past it, which meant the 90-cycle response clock was already running, had been running since 6:09 on the morning I filed. They just realized this when they tried to submit the delay response because the automated compliance system flagged the conflict and rejected the delay request. My comm lit up within 6 hours, not a courtesy notice this time. An urgent channel request, Keth Sr. Observer Velt ass. I let it sit for 90 minutes, then I accepted. Commander Osai, his voice was composed, but composed the way a room is composed after someone has quickly straightened everything in it before a guest arrives. We appear to have encountered a scheduling complication with the review timeline. I'm sorry to hear that, I said. The continuous standing obligation attachment you filed is a standard procedural right available to all member states under the original Compact Procedural Codex, I said. Volume 14, Section 31, I can send you the citation if that would help. A pause. That provision has not been used in active proceedings in some considerable time. No, I agreed, it hasn't. Another pause. Longer. The majority will need to convene a session to address the review timeline issue. Of course I'll be available. I paused a moment myself. I'm sorry, this must be a busy period. Should I send the Shani rendered copy to senior counsel directly, or would the standard distribution channel be sufficient? The line was quiet for 4 full seconds. In my experience, 4 seconds of quiet from a Keth diplomat was equivalent to approximately 30 seconds of any other species distress. Standard distribution will be fine, he said. I thanked him and closed the channel. Hal called that evening. I could hear the tension in his voice, the same wire-type frequency it had held since the band went through, but there was something else underneath it now. Something that hadn't been there before. I've been getting reports, he said. The colonies are scared, the outer stations are scared, Yara. If something happens, tell them to keep documenting, I said. Every veil response time, every communication, every delayed acknowledgement. You keep asking for that documentation. What is it for? The harm component of my challenge, I said. I can prove the ban is legally void without it, but I need to prove it causes active harm to civilian populations to invoke the 90-cycle clock. The documentation the colonies are collecting is evidence of systematic negligence in the compact's protection mandate. I leaned back in my chair. They're not just witnesses, Hal. They're building my case. He was quiet for a moment, then how much longer? 30 cycles from tonight, I said. Maybe less. I heard him exhale. I've got crews Ready the moment this changes. Not before I need this clean. The moment those ships move before the legal ruling the Keth have grounds to escalate, and everything I've built becomes a secondary issue. Understood, he paused. You eating? I looked at the empty protein bar wrapper I hadn't thrown away yet. It was still on the corner of my desk. I don't know why I hadn't recycled it. Yes, I said. Actual food. Relatively speaking. He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. 30 cycles, he said, like a prayer or a promise. I'll hold. The emergency Keth session convened 12 days later, first emergency session of the full majority in over 2 centuries. According to Suvith, who had been tracking the meeting records since I gave him access to the scheduling archive feeds, I watched the opening of the session on the diplomatic feed from my office, because I was not invited and was not supposed to know it was happening. Fact that both of us understood and neither of us mentioned in the formal diplomatic exchange that continued smoothly on its separate track. The session lasted 19 hours. I know because I was still awake when it closed. What I didn't know, what I had no way of knowing yet, was that a data packet had left my office 6 weeks earlier on a timed relay, not a comm transmission, an archive distribution request filed through the Compact's public information framework, requesting that a set of historical incident documents be added to the publicly accessible Colonial History Archive. Standard request. Routine processing time of approximately 6 weeks. The documents were the complete incident record from Kareth Station, the internal reports, the response logs, the communication records, the full timeline of what the 11-day Veil response window had looked like from inside. I'd filed the distribution request the same week I filed the challenge. By the time the Keth emergency session closed, those documents had been in the public archive for 9 days, picked up by 3 news distribution services, then 14, then somewhere around day 7 by every major compact information network, from the core systems out to the reach. Velt Ass called me the morning after the session. He was not composed this time. Those documents, he said. They're public record, I said. Declassified colonial incident files. The public archive framework requires accurate historical records to be accessible to all member states. I let a moment pass. I was following the rules. He said nothing for several seconds. Commander Osai, what is it precisely that you want? I looked at the empty protein bar wrapper on the corner of my desk, at the stacks of documents along every wall, at the pale light coming through the viewport, the slow rotation of the docking ring below, the indifferent stars past it. What I've always wanted, I said, a fair system that works for everyone in it. He closed the channel. I recycled the wrapper. 30 cycles, the clock was running and the galaxy was starting to pay attention. I had been to the Grand Compact Chamber twice before, once for the formal presentation of Earth's Observer credentials 6 years earlier, when I was still new enough to the role to be genuinely moved by the scale of the place. Once for a routine session on resource lane allocations that lasted 11 hours and accomplished nothing I could detect. This was different. I walked in alone. My legal team was back on Earth. I had sent them 2 weeks before the session, partly because the cost of keeping them on Varel 4 was straining the operational budget past what I could justify, and partly because this next part was not a legal argument. The legal argument was already in the filing, 1,412 pages of it. I didn't need to bring lawyers to repeat what was already in the record. What I needed was the room. The chamber held representatives from 214 recognized spacefaring species. The ceiling was 300 m at its highest point, designed in the compact's founding era to communicate the weight and breadth of the civilization it housed. It worked. It was supposed to make you feel small, to make your concerns feel proportional to the size of what surrounded them. I had decided on the way in that the ceiling was wrong about me. I found my seat, which was in the observer section, non-voting, designated by a small placard with Earth's flag symbol. The chair was slightly too narrow for human proportions, a design detail that had apparently never been addressed in 6 years of Earth's membership. I sat in it anyway. I sat straight. The Keth lead counsel opened the session. His name was Wrathful, and he was, by any reasonable measure, excellent at what he did. He had argued 39 cases before the grand session and won 36 of them. His voice had the particular quality of complete certainty, the voice of a person who has never seriously doubted that the room would agree with them before they finished speaking. He spoke for 2 hours and 14 minutes. I counted. I had nothing else to do, since my speaking time would come at the end, and I had brought nothing with me to read. Wrathful's argument distilled past the procedural language and the historical citations and the careful framing, said this: humans were an unstable species with a documented tendency toward militaristic behavior, and their unrestricted presence in galactic corridors presented a systemic security risk. The compact existed to provide order. Clause 7 Sigma preserved order. Earth's challenge was an attempt to prioritize one species' preferences over the collective safety of all. He used the word preference 4 times. Not rights, not security, preference. When he sat down, the chamber monitor indicated it was Earth's representative's turn to speak. I stood up. I had written my opening argument, had been writing it in various forms for most of the past 18 months. The document on my tablet was 31 pages long, organized into 7 sections, thoroughly cited. I did not open the tablet. I looked at the chamber. 214 species, their representatives, arranged in the sweeping rows of the delegate seating, their translation systems running, their attention pointed at me in a range of ways, from genuinely interested to professionally neutral, to the particular quality of stillness that meant they had already decided I would fail. Before I addressed the legal record, I said, I want to read some names. I took a single card from my jacket pocket. I had written them by hand. Lieutenant Owen Graves, Engineer First Class; Donna Fielding, Station Commander; Paul Aruda, Navigation Specialist; Claire Morton, Medical Officer; Ben Akafer, Maintenance Crew Chief; Sandra Voss, Research Coordinator; Yemi Adebio, Communications Specialist; Ray Holt, Junior Engineer; Lana Brandt, Pilot; Second Class Marcus Adair. I put the card back in my pocket. Those are the names of the 10 crew members I lost at Kareth Station. I said. The Vale Response Unit arrived 11 days and 4 hours after the distress signal was sent. The compact's protection mandate was in full effect at that time. no human fleet was nearby, because human vessels in that corridor were already operating under movement restrictions that preceded Clause 7. Sigma, my crew followed every rule. The rules did not follow them. The chamber was quiet, not the performed. Quiet of a body waiting for the expected. Argument something different, I'd spoken for less than 90 seconds. I sat down. The silence lasted longer than Wrathful's entire argument. I let it. Then I opened my tablet and began to speak. What I laid out over the next hour and 40 minutes was not at its core an argument about human fleets. Wrathful had framed it that way. The Keth had framed it that way from the beginning because if the question was should this specific species have ships, then it was about us and about the majority's authority to make that determination and about whatever characterization of human behavior they wanted to put on the record. I had changed the question. The question I was answering was, does the Compact's protection mandate actually protect the members it claims to protect? I had the data, 18 months of it. Response times across 83 documented. Distress events from non-majority member states in the past decade, average veil. Response time to core system member calls 1.4 days. Average response time to outer corridor non-majority member calls 9.2 days. The gap was not random variation, it was systemic and it was documented and it had a name. Then the legal architecture, the unanimous consent requirement, the ratification void, the chain of citations running from the foundational treaty through 3 centuries of amendment records, all of it indexed, all of it cross-referenced. I did not argue that Clause 7 Sigma was unfair. I argued with the Compact's own documents that it had never been legally valid. But I did not stop there because stopping there was still the argument about us. What I asked for when I reached the final section was not the lifting of the human fleet ban. I asked the Grand Session to adopt what I had called the revised protection mandate framework, independent response capacity for outer corridor member states, including the right to maintain provisional defense vessels, mandatory response time accountability, standards for the veil with automatic review triggered by any delay past 3 days to a civilian distress signal, a standing oversight committee composed of non-majority member representatives to monitor compliance, not for humans, for every small species, sitting in a chair too narrow for their proportions in a room designed to make them feel like preferences rather than members. There were 214 species in that room. The Keth majority represented 41% of the votes. The rest were distributed across species ranging from significant to barely counted. I had spent the last 6 weeks in between document reviews and protein bars and translation matrix runs, sending detailed briefing packages to the diplomatic representatives of every non-majority species with a documented response time gap in the data. Not advocating, not lobbying, just sending the numbers, the Compact's own numbers in their own languages with the relevant legal citations attached. Just being very thorough. Wrathful's rebuttal was sharp. He was good and he adapted faster than I expected, pivoting from the human threat, framing to an argument about stability and the risks of fragmenting the Compact's unified security architecture. It was a reasonable argument, delivered Well, when the floor opened for general delegate comment, something happened that hadn't happened in 200 years of compact sessions, according to Suvith's records. 11 species spoke before the Keth coalition could organize a response, block not in sequence, in an irregular, overlapping series of requests that the chamber monitor had to process in order, each one placing on record support for the revised protection mandate framework, each one citing specific incidents from their own colonial records, their own response time gaps, their own version of Kareth Station that they had never previously had standing to raise. 11 species, then 14. The Thelian delegation was 19th. I had not contacted them. I had not sent Suvith delegation a briefing package. I had been very careful not to because Suvith worked in the archive and I had not wanted there to be any appearance of using our working relationship to conduct political outreach. He was in the gallery. I did not know how he had obtained a gallery seat. He was in the third row, folded forward, his characteristic posture, and when the Thelian delegate placed the delegation support on record, he looked at me. I looked back at the floor. Lord have mercy on your math, I thought, and this time I meant it as something close to gratitude. The vote was called 3 hours later. The chamber rules required it once sufficient block of delegates had placed formal positions on record. The Keth majority voted against all of their aligned clients and trade partners. Voted against. It was a solid block, the same block that had passed Clause 7. Sigma without a floor debate, the same block that had operated this system for 6 centuries. It was not enough. The non-majority vote, when it consolidated, carried with it not just numbers but the specific legal way of the continuous standing obligation clock, which meant that a failure to pass a resolution addressing the documented civilian harm would have triggered an automatic compact review process that the Keth had even less appetite for than the framework vote. They had built a legal system designed to keep smaller members compliant. The same system, read carefully, had given smaller members the lever to move with the revised protection mandate framework, passed with 214 delegates present and voting. The margin was not close. Wrathful did not look at me when the result was announced. He gathered his materials with precise, careful movements and walked out of the chamber. Through the primary delegate exit, I watched him go. There was no satisfaction in it exactly. It was more like the feeling of a clock stopping that had been running too loud for too long, the absence of a noise you'd gotten used to. I sat in the too narrow chair for a few minutes after the chamber began to empty. I was very tired in the specific way of someone who has been running on a single purpose for so long that the cessation of the purpose leaves the body briefly confused about what to do next. My comm buzzed. How? I answered it. He wasn't talking this time. There was just breathing for a moment, then I watched the feed. I know. Yara, his voice was different, stripped down to something underneath the Admiral, you got them. We're not done, I said. Implementation process starts in 30 cycles and the Keth will file 6 procedural objections in the first week. Alone, I need the fleet ready. How? But not moving. Ready. Ready, he confirmed. Everything you need. I stood up and straightened my jacket. The chamber was nearly empty. The ceiling was still 300 m high, and still. Designed to make you feel small. I walked out under it without looking up. I found out about the naming convention from a compact administrative notice sent to my office 7 days after the session. The revised protection mandate framework had been formally cataloged in the Compact's legal registry as the OSI provisions. I called the administrative office and asked them to change it. They said the naming of significant legal restructurings after their primary architects was standard compact practice and not subject to alteration by the architect in question. I told them that was the most counterintuitive policy I had encountered in 6 years of working with the compact, which was saying something, given the document I'd found in volume 14. They thanked me for my feedback. The OSI provisions it was, I found this deeply irritating in a way I could not fully articulate, which probably meant something about how much easier it was to fight for things than to let them be named after you. Hal called about the parade. He had apparently been planning it since the session vote, which meant he'd been planning it before the vote was confirmed, which was very Hal. I told him to use the budget for commissioning responsivity vessels with proper medical bay capacity and rain specifications that covered the outer corridor approach lanes. He argued not strongly. He knew I was right. You could take a week, he said, just a week, come home, eat something that isn't whatever you've been eating. I have 17 implementation disputes to manage, I said. They'll still be there in a week. The Keth will file 3 more objections by end of cycle if I'm not monitoring the response queue. The first wave is testing turnaround time. If I show gaps, they'll stack the objections to create delay. I pulled up the dispute log on my second screen. I can take a week in 30 cycles. He was quiet for a moment. The same 30 cycles you told me 5 weeks ago. Different 30 cycles, I said. These ones count down. He made the not quite laugh sound. I heard underneath it the thing he wasn't saying, the same thing he never said, the thing that sat in the background of every conversation since Kareth. He had been my fleet commander then. He had been the one who made the call not to send unauthorized vessels into the restricted corridor. He had followed the rules, and so had I. And the rules had failed us both in ways neither of us said out loud anymore. 30 cycles, he said, and closed the channel. Suvith came to say goodbye 2 days after the session. He was going back to Thelos for a rotation, the standard archival leave cycle that Thelians took every 18 months. He stood in the doorway of my office and looked at the stacks of documents that had migrated from crates to walls to every flat surface in the room over the past year and a half, and he held a flat package under one arm. I brought you something, he said, an archivist's gift. It is the tradition, when something significant has been found in the archive, to give the original document to the person who found it. He crossed the room and set the package on my desk. I opened it. It was the original pre-compact foundational treaty, not a copy. The actual document sealed under preservation material, the real paper. 612 years old. The page with the unanimous consent amendment clause was visible through the transparent cover. The line that had started everything, marked by a conservation tab in pale gold. I looked at it for a long moment. I did not know what to do with gifts. I knew how to work. I knew how to argue. I knew how to read 600-year-old legal documents and find the one line that mattered. Sentiment was a different language, and I had never been fully fluent in it. "Thank you," I said. He nodded once. "It belongs with someone who will actually read it." He left. I put the framed document behind my desk, at an angle where I couldn't quite see it from my chair, because if I could see it, I would look at it, and if I looked at it, I would think about what it represented. And if I thought about what it represented, I would lose the thread of the 17 active implementation disputes. Later, there was time for that later. The Keth filed 4 objections in the first week, which was one more than I'd predicted. I handled 3 of them directly from the legal record. The 4th was more creative, a structural argument about the interpretation of provisional defense capacity in the framework text that required pulling 2 additional documents and a clarifying addendum I'd actually anticipated and drafted 3 months ago, waiting in my files. I submitted the addendum and went back to the implementation queue. Veldas requested a private meeting the second week, not a comm channel. The time and in-person request, I agreed to it. He came to my office. He looked at the documents along the walls, the ones Suvith had reorganized one last time before he left, and then he looked at me, and for the first time since the ban had gone through, he did not reach for the smooth condescension of something larger talking to something smaller. He just looked tired. "You are going to keep doing this," he said. It was not a question. "Administering the implementation of the OSI provisions, yes, that's my responsibility." "That is not what I mean." He sat down in the chair across from my desk, which nobody ever sat in because I had been using it as a secondary document surface. He moved 3 document folders to make room. "You found vulnerabilities in 6 other major security provisions. I know you found them. You were reading in that direction from the beginning." I let a moment pass. "The compact is a very well-built system," I said. "It just wasn't built for everyone in it. That's a correctable problem, and you intend to correct it one provision at a time," I said, "using the compact's own rules, which is, I believe, how change is supposed to work." He looked at his hands for a moment. When he looked back up, something in his expression had shifted in a way I couldn't entirely read, something between calculation and something older. "You named 10 people," he said at the beginning of your address. "Yes. I read the Karath records after they became public, all of them." He paused. "I have been with the compact for 41 years. I have voted for 17 security provisions in that time. And GT snorts. And GT. I did not read the incident documentation the way your records showed it. There was nothing I could say to that, so I didn't say anything." He stood up. "The Keth will continue to file objections during implementation. I want you to know that I will not be coordinating those filings." He picked up his things and walked out. I sat with that for a minute. Not what it meant politically, though it meant quite a lot politically, just the fact of it. 41 years in the compact, 17 provisions, 1 set of incident records, read fully for the first time. I opened the implementation queue. There were 16 active disputes, 4 pending responses, and 2 new objections that had come in while I was in the meeting. The outer corridor species that had spoken at the session were beginning to file their own provisional defense capacity registrations under the new framework, the first wave of something that would take years to fully settle into place. The veil had already received formal notification of the new response time, accountability standards, and had submitted a preliminary compliance schedule that I had sent back with 13 specific amendments. Hal called to tell me the first response ready vessel was cleared for commission under the new provisional defense rules. It was a small ship, outer corridor, capable medical bay, full reign. Communications, he wanted to name it after someone. I told him to name it after Owen Graves. He was quiet for a moment. Yeah, he said, yeah, okay. I went home to Earth at the end of the third week, not for a week, for 4 days, which was what the implementation Q could reasonably tolerate, with Hal's team managing the routine acknowledgments. The apartment had been empty for 18 months. It was dusty in the specific way of a place that had been waiting rather than abandoned. I opened the windows, cleared the surfaces that were covered in nothing at all, made actual food in an actual kitchen with ingredients that required more than one decision. I ate at the table. The names were on the wall in the hallway. I had put them there before I left for Varel 4 because I had known then, in the part of myself that does not speak in policy language, that if I did not come back having built something from what happened to them, I was not sure I would be able to come back to an apartment that still held their names. I ate and I did not look away from the wall. I had run on their absence for 18 months on the 11-day number, on the specific weight of reading a courtesy notice about a ban while knowing what it meant for 2 billion people who would have no one coming when the clock started running. It was not revenge. I want to be clear about that. It was never revenge. Revenge is for people who believe that breaking something even restores a balance. I do not believe that. I believe that what is broken stays broken, and that the only honest response to it is to build something around the break that makes the same break harder to happen again. That is a slower thing. It does not feel like justice exactly. It does not give back what was taken. What it gives back is something else, harder to name. On the second morning, I woke up early and sat at my kitchen table with the implementation queue open on my tablet and a cup of actual coffee, not a protein bar, coffee from beans brewed properly. Outside the window, the city was doing its early morning thing, the particular soft noise of something large and ordinary just beginning its day. The first new cath objection was in the Q procedural specific. Well argued, they had good lawyers. They were going to keep using them. I had already anticipated this one. The response was drafted, ready, waiting. My files on a 30-cycle delay. I submitted it and moved to the next item. The galaxy had tried to close a door. I had spent 18 months reading the doors blueprints until I found the part where the hinges were missing. That door was open now, and behind it were 16 other doors, and I had already read their blueprints too, and the compact's own rules said I had the right to file challenges on each of them, one at a time, through proper channels with correct formatting in all 6 official languages. I finished my coffee. 30 cycles until the next major implementation review. I had a lot of reading to do.